are listening to She Leads with Carly, and our guest today is Christina VandenBerg. Christina is the co-founder and CEO of MyHuddle, a tech-enabled sports psychology service designed for student athletes. She started MyHuddle with her husband, and they are striving to accomplish their mission to really make mental health support accessible for all student athletes. Her passion for this really stems from her experience as a former soccer player at Harvard. And then she went on to receive her MBA from Stanford, which taught her that tapping into your passion is probably the most important aspect before starting a company. This and so many more lessons from Christina. I hope you enjoy. Hello, Christina. Thank you so much for joining She Leads. How are you today?
I'm doing great today, Carly. Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. So, Christina, you are the CEO and co-founder of MyHuddle, which is a tech-enabled sports psychology service designed for student athletes. And you founded MyHuddle with your husband, and you guys really have this mission to, make mental health support accessible for all student athletes to have at their fingertips. And I almost see it as, physical health, physical support when you have injuries. That's always treated, first thing. And so now you're raising that level, if even more than physical health, is to really treat mental health. And I love that. I'm personally incredibly passionate about this topic as, a former soccer player at Stanford. You see it so much. And so I love it and I'm excited to talk about it. But before we get into MyHuddle, you got an MBA from Stanford GSB. You worked in user acquisition and growth marketing at ZipRecruiter, as well as MapMyFitness. So you've been in this, sports tech field for a long time. So take me back to Harvard. You got a degree in government and economics, so a bit different than where you are today. At this moment, did you know what you wanted to go into, or where were you seeing your career when you were at Harvard?
Mm-hmm. Well, the short answer of did I know what I wanted to go into is no.
Yeah.
I think in college you get exposed to the world of academia, you get exposed to a few career paths, but really being at Harvard, it made me think that there were only two choices. You do investment banking or law, or become a doctor, right? It was a very narrow viewpoint. And I've realized now, being 10 years into my career, that there's so many different paths you can take. So what happened for me is I stumbled upon this thing called consulting, which sounded really awesome, where you get to go and advise Fortune 500 companies and work with the C-suite level. And that sounded amazing to me, and get to travel around the US and consult for different companies. So I jumped into that, figuring, okay, I don't really know what I want to do next, but let me explore this world of business and see if I'm cut out for that. I think that maybe you can connect to this, but being a student athlete, I played soccer at Harvard.
Yeah.
Being a soccer player was so part of my identity for, at that point, 20 years, that I didn't know if I could do anything else well, right? I knew that I could be a student athlete. I knew I could be great on the soccer field, but I hadn't yet tested myself really in the professional world. And so I was anxious to see and curious to see, could I also do a good job as a business professional. And so that's what I ended up doing right after school.
Yeah. And I'll dive into your soccer experience when we get to MyHuddle, but tell me about that transition, because I could relate to that, and a lot of people can relate to that. You've been playing this sport since you were 5 years old, such a little kid, and now you're kind of, you're putting it away. And it's, again, like you said, it's such a big part of your identity. So what, did you get advice about how to transition during this time, or how did you deal with it?
Yeah, I mean, that transition is huge. And I know that everyone goes through a transition after college. But I think that the athlete element was a big part of it, right? Again, that identity is so wrapped up into it. And suddenly you meet people on the street and they say, oh, who are you? What do you do? You no longer can say, oh, I'm a soccer player.
Right.
But I think it was really healthy for me. I at that time was ready to hang up my cleats. I was ready to test myself in another environment. And I think that what really helped was actually seeing my teammates go on and do things, go on and work in education, work for nonprofits, travel the world and work for NGOs, or go into the law or medical professions.
Right.
And that really inspired me, saying, okay, they can do it. I can do it too.
Yeah.
And that's not saying, I think that first year was actually a really hard transition for me. Everything from, you no longer have your team environment, you no longer have a schedule for working out, and you're sitting at a desk all day. That was a very hard transition. But you learn to adapt. And actually, I think a lot of the skills that you learn from being an athlete, I found were extremely applicable to the work world. Everything from collaboration, leadership, resilience, work ethic. Those I found were things that I could tap into very easily.
Yeah.
From my experience being a student athlete, and that now I try to share that information with current student athletes to say, I know you feel like, during summers and most of your time has been spent pursuing your sport, but
Exactly.
That is having a job, right? That is a career path. And I encourage them to put it on their resume and put it on their LinkedIn, because it shows a commitment and dedication that is extremely relevant once you get into the working world.
Yeah. I mean, and I could relate to that because, the soccer season, it's in fall. And so our summers are like 4 weeks, you just kind of just train the entire time. And then it's even harder making that transition because, you don't necessarily have that work experience that other students are getting each summer. So I can definitely relate. So tell me, how was, you did consulting at Deloitte. How was that job? Was it, meet your expectations? Were you feeling confident, or how was that experience?
Well, I remember the first day that I showed up, I was in a class of about 25 different business analysts from across the country.
Yeah.
And I was so scared. I was, I'm like, wow, this is a notch up. I gotta prove my worth here. But it was the best job that I could have had out of undergrad. Deloitte had an amazing training program where they, teach you Excel skills. They teach you how to have professional communication, how to build a story and an outline in a slide deck. And some of those business fundamentals I didn't get in undergrad. And I'm so grateful that I got that training, on the ground experience through the company. I also met some of my best friends from working there. And that was also an amazing part of the job, just having that community of other analysts that are, our first job out of school and going through that experience together. So the first few months there's a steep learning curve, but you have amazing support around you to be able to ramp up. And again, for me, it was really proving that I could do it, that I could, be a professional. Right. And that was, I learned so much about myself and grew up a lot, I think, in that first year.
Yeah. And so when you look back at, that time at Harvard playing soccer and then, kind of moving on in your career, putting soccer aside and hanging up your cleats, what advice can you give those who are going through that and who are, struggling or going through that transition where, looking back now, it was an amazing, growth opportunity for you, but probably in the moment there were challenging times. So what can you say now as a reflection?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that, knowing what I know now, I would, tell myself to, have confidence in what I've done, what I've learned, and know that those skills are applicable to whatever challenge I go to next. And those are very much transferable skills. So I wish I had, been a bit more confident in myself at that time and kind of trusted the process, if you will. Yeah. But that's obviously, easier said looking back than in the moment. But I know that when I've worked with ex-athletes, for instance, it's been a positive experience because I think that idea of teamwork and grit and selflessness at times is really built into the experience of being a student athlete. And so, I think I would tell myself to trust the process a little bit more.
Amazing. Yeah. And so take me now, how long were you at Deloitte for was that right after you went to the GSB or was that, okay. So how was that timeline or what made you decide to get an MBA?
Yeah. So I stayed at Deloitte for about 3.5 years. I thought maybe I would stay there for just 2 years and then jump ship, but it ended up being a great experience because it's project based and you get to work on a bunch of different projects and across different industries and work for different companies. But there was a point where I felt like my learning curve was starting to flatten, and that's kind of just a gut feeling, something that you have to pick up on yourself. The first 2 years were crazy, and then by the third year, I started to feel, okay, am I learning and growing as quickly? I don't think I am. And so I started to turn to, okay, what's next? And at that time, I had worked across different industries and different companies, but I still didn't really know what I wanted to do. And I saw business school as a great opportunity to explore a bunch of different opportunities in a pretty risk-free environment, get exposure to thought leaders, other students that were pursuing different career paths, and also invest in myself too. Once you get out of school and you're in the working world, that time to be a little selfless or selfish and invest in your own education, it's harder to do. And so I figured that those 2 years in business school would be a great time for professional development, but also personal development. I mean, you have the rest of your career to work, right? So I thought that those 2 years would be a really unique time to have. And so I ended up applying to business school.
Yeah, I love that. I've actually never heard that perspective almost as a way of, investing in yourself. And I agree. I think that's so important and so valuable. So, going to business school at this moment, did you see yourself, one day starting your own business, or, did you always have that entrepreneurial itch, as they say, or what was kind of your mindset career-wise?
Yeah, I'm smiling when you ask that question because the truth is not really. No. I think the best thing that I learned out from business school was that I could be an entrepreneur. And I learned that through my fellow classmates who inspired me, who showed me, that they were doing it, that they had these big dreams and visions and they were executing on it. And, I sat side by side with them in class and we worked on group projects together. We're not that different. So if they can do it, I can do it too. And I think that really was a formative part of business school for me. But entering it, I had a long laundry list of things that I wanted to explore. And then what ended up happening is that I continued to gravitate to this world of sports tech in terms of, there's so much thrown at you at business school in terms of meetings, events, speaker series, classes, and you end up having to say no to things and then choose what you want to actually prioritize. And I always ended up prioritizing the opportunities that were around, digital health or sports tech and that intersection. And that was very telling to me. Like, okay, that's interesting. That's where I'm gravitating towards. Let me listen to that. And that was a really great insight for me. I also think at business school, and particularly at the program that I went to, it really emphasizes finding your passion. I mean, no pressure, right? Like go and find your passion. But it was that time again to reflect on that. What am I passionate about? Who are the people that I want to serve? What are the unmet problems that I want to help solve? And that's where I discovered that I really connected back to being a student athlete, and I really wanted to serve that population. And the area of unmet need was around the mental side of being a student athlete.
Yeah, definitely. So, okay, so you have this, you've learned more about your passion and the possibility, the high likelihood that you could start a company in, mental health and sports tech. But what happened next? Like you were more just, okay, let me find a job and then maybe in the future we'll start a company?
Yeah. So during business school, I ended up taking this class, which was a startup class, and got to work on the beginnings of what is now MyHuddle in that class. So that was where you did tons of customer interviews, assess the need, and it ended up directing us towards, okay, there's this huge unmet need around the mental and emotional side of being an injured athlete. And with that, as I was nearing graduation, I was debating, do I continue pursuing this right now? I know that there's unmet need. I have a vision for what the solution could be,
Yeah.
Or do I go and get a bit more experience under my belt, learn how successful companies have grown and scaled their operations.
Right.
And, that was a really hard decision for me at the time, because I knew that there was an opportunity here, but I also felt like I could use a bit more experience before taking on that challenge of being a founder and CEO.
Yeah.
And so that's ultimately what I ended up doing. I ended up joining a fast-growing tech startup here in Los Angeles. And it was a fantastic leadership team, a company that was growing, doubling its revenue year over year. And I got to jump right into the middle of that and learn so much in a very short time about how to grow a company. So, it was a hard decision. It was a really hard decision at that time. But I think also, some of the realities of life also come into play with that decision. And business school, I haven't been working for 2 years. Business school is expensive.
Right.
And, I think it was more also a practical decision of, okay, let me get a bit more of a buffer so that when I do go and take this risk, I'm not so stressed about, I've worked up a bit of a cushion to be able to do this.
Yeah, definitely. So, and if you look now, like going back, would you do the same thing, or would you, because I feel like there's also that side where, if you have that passion, then you got to go for it because someone else could do it, or, like, did you have that kind of fear that someone else is going to do it while you were getting this cushion, while you were getting this experience, or did you feel, how was that?
Yeah, I mean, looking back, I still think it was the right decision.
Yeah.
And that's not to say that I still worked on it and times, nights and weekends.
Mm-hmm.
I thought a ton about it. I followed the trends. But I really feel like I'm in a different place professionally in my growth now than I was, that was 4 years ago. And I now feel like I don't hesitate around my ability to execute on this company and the vision, whereas I think 4 years ago I did. And whether or not that was right, I think so much of being founding a company or entrepreneurial journey is the journey with yourself.
Right. And
so if you feel that way, whether or not you're right or wrong, it's just how you feel. And I think that now I don't have those hesitations. And so I know that the time is right now. And actually no one has done it in those times. So, still that opportunity.
Yeah, definitely. So, okay, so now tell me about MyHuddle. Tell me in your own words, your passion for it, why you started it. You started with your husband. So tell me about that, and then we'll dive deeper into it.
Yeah, well, I love the description that you gave at the outset. I think it was really accurate. And, for you being a former student athlete, you clearly understand the need. But yeah, MyHuddle is really inspired by my own experience as a student athlete.
Right.
As I look back on my experience playing soccer through high school, through college, I realized that it was extremely intense experience, right? The pressure to get recruited in high school, playing on multiple teams at once, the transition to college and upping your game at that point, dealing with injuries, getting benched, all the above. Yeah. And the thing is, my experience with that is not unique. Every athlete has that experience. And when I looked back on that, I remember those times of not necessarily knowing where to turn, right? To get that mental support, both to perform at your best, right? I wanted to reach my full potential in my sport.
Right.
I wanted to hit my goals. But also those times where you it affects you on how you feel on and off the field affects your performance, and recognizing that the mental, everyone has their mental health, and it's just like physical health and should be treated like physical health in sports. And so, as I looked on that and I started talking to more athletes, I saw that so many felt that way. And there was this gap in the mental side, mental support and coaching for being a student athlete, really because one, stigma, misunderstanding around what it means to work on your mental health as an athlete, especially in a sports culture where it, glorifies a tough it out and gritty mentality. Second, barriers in terms of access and time. I mean, student athletes are some of the most busy people on campus, and having to go to another appointment, having to go somewhere in person, that's just not realistic. And then, third, cost barriers. It's typically, it's the reason why professional athletes work with coaches like this and have dedicated sports psychology professionals, mental health coaches to work with them. But that's not accessible to your everyday student athlete. And so as I, pulled back the curtain on that and started uncovering, why there was this gap, and I started leaning on, my past experience in tech and seeing the role that technology can play in breaking down barriers and making services that previously are inaccessible now accessible to the masses. And that's what I want to bring to the world of mental health coaching for athletes. Make that accessible to athletes where they are today, which is right on their phones, and make it something that is accessible to every athlete right at their fingertips.
Yeah. And so, I obviously, like both of us, played in college, so we really understand, what happens on a day-to-day basis, and, the effect of being injured and sitting and watching your teammates, or the effect of coming into college and, as you said, like being benched and whatnot. Tell me more specifically about your experience, like when you had an injury, the struggles that you went through, because it's hard for people to kind of see on the outskirts of, it's hard. They do a lot. The time management is hard. But in my opinion, time management was the least of my, that was the not as hard compared to, the mental aspect and the transition and whatnot. So give me a little insight of that so our listeners can get a better idea.
I'm really glad you asked that question, because I think you're right that from the outside, if you read my sports bio, you'd say, wow, fantastic career, All-American, played with the U17 national team, like won 2 Ivy League championships. Like it looks, great from the outside. And it was great. Like I would not change it for the world.
Yeah.
But that does not mean there weren't really some lows and really some challenging times. So to paint a picture of that, I got to Harvard freshman year. I came in being like, I'm this top recruit. I'm ready to make my impact. Yeah. I show up first day of camp, and multiple girls had quit the team over the summer. So we had just one senior on the team. We had about 13 freshmen joining the team. We ended up going that season losing, I think our record was 3-1-13. So we lost like overwhelmingly the majority of games, ended up the bottom of our league, which, at that point, I usually had been on top teams. I usually, had scored. I think I didn't score a single goal, and I was a forward. That's not good.
Right. And
so it's the first time where I felt like I was consistently failing, right? And failing at something I'm supposed to be good at. And, granted, you could, outside looking in, you can be like, well, why'd you have a problem? Like you're at Harvard. And I was extremely grateful for that. But in that moment, like for your reality, it's a hard thing to grapple with. And I will say though, that experience going through that, and we ended up having a coaching change. So the coach that had recruited me left. The coach that recruited me had left over the summer as well. So we also had a coaching change going into my freshman year. Yeah. And then our coach left again. So we had a new coach my sophomore year. And so there's just a lot of transition and changes to deal with. But I will say what I learned from that experience is the power of the team, the power of my teammates. We were the ones that picked each other up. And because we went through that experience together, we wanted to win so badly. And it ended up my junior year that we even called it, we flipped it, right? We flipped our record, and we ended up winning the Ivy League championship. And that was like a breakout year for me personally. And it was not the physical side that I changed. It was really my mental side. There's actually an article in our paper, in the Crimson paper, with the top opening line saying, the thing that changed about Christina's game was not what happened, on the field. It was what happened in her head.
Wow.
And it was about my own confidence and belief, and ability to take the shot. And so, those first 2 years were really challenging. And then junior year happened, great year. And then senior year happened. start of fall, I think I'm going to have again another great season. And I got injured at the start of the season, and I had a knee injury that put me out for the first month of the season, and that really, really rocked me. Yeah. It was also at the time when pressure to do job recruiting was heating up. I was working on a senior thesis, and so that was really stressing me out. And so personally, that year I didn't have a great season. And that was, the last year I was playing soccer, and so that was hard. That was probably actually my hardest year, that senior moment, because of the expectations that you have, and not meeting those expectations. Yeah. But again, I'm so grateful for the experience and what I learned from it. But now when I look back on that, I want to give athletes that support that I know that they need in that moment. Right. And so that they can pull out of that and have the tools to be able to overcome those challenges and feel good and perform good on the field.
Yeah. I think it's so important. Not only, I think you hit the nail on the head. Yes, the team's important, but that idea of personal self-confidence is like a game changer. Like once you have that self-confidence, and like you said, it's so easy to associate, performance, minutes as self-value, and you conflate the two. So I love that you said that. And also if you didn't have those experiences, then maybe MyHuddle wouldn't be happening, and you wouldn't be helping, so many student athletes across the world. So now tell me, how has MyHuddle gone? You started during this crazy year, COVID, everything that's been happening. How has it been? Has it been challenging? What are the challenges you faced?
Yeah, well, it's been already just an incredible journey, and incredible thing to be working on that I feel so passionate about. I've never, felt so purpose-driven in my career. Wow. Yeah. And we started MyHuddle, at the start of COVID. And that was because of what I was seeing in the media with rates of mental health challenges for athletes 2 times higher than historicals, obviously for good reason, with cancellations of seasons and postponement of sports. And I knew I just had to jump into this. There were so many articles talking about mental health challenges of athletes, but then not talking about accessible solutions. And I want to fill that gap, right? And so, my husband, who works as a orthopedic surgeon, focusing on adolescent patients and young adult patients, has seen, the trauma that comes from getting injured and having a serious injury. ACL is one that we look at that's extremely common in female soccer players. And I actually draw parallels to that, the loss that you have around your sport with injury, and the loss that you have, with COVID canceling sports. Right. And so we knew that we had to jump into this space, and it's you in any startup, you start small, right? You really have to understand the customer needs, and you build around that. And so I'm really proud of the progress that our team has made. But I still feel, we are just getting started at the same time. And starting a business in COVID, there's been some definitely challenges with that. I mean, I think every interaction that I've had is one-on-one through, a Zoom video. And so you can't really, if it wasn't COVID, I would go to the sports fields. I would go and interview parents that are standing around the sidelines and go to games and talk to athletes. And so it's been a little bit harder, I think, to interact with people that aren't immediately in your network. But the positives is that people have been around. Yeah. People have been willing to give feedback and participate. And, on one hand, people have asked, does COVID negatively affect your business, or does COVID positively affect your business, given that we're, associated with youth sports, high school sports, college sports? And I mean, there's been both positive impacts and negative impacts potentially. I think on one hand, when athletes have a season to play, they might be more inclined to say, oh, I'm ready to work with a sports psychology coach. But on the other hand, because they don't have a season, insight. The mental side of your game is something that you can still work on, even if you can't practice with your team, and you're feeling that sense of loss. And so you need more of that support. So, time will tell on that, but either way, it's been an amazing journey. And I'm really grateful to be on it.
Yeah. And from a, purely entrepreneurial perspective, what you learned at Stanford Business School, what's probably the biggest misconception about starting a business that you wish you knew before, but, now you're in the thick of things? And yeah, how's that? Yeah,
I think that, coming out of a lot of the classes that I took around startup, creating a product, was a lot focused on the product.
Yeah.
What is the product? How does it solve your needs? What are the design criteria? Get it in the hands of customers. And that's 100% true. You need to do that. But the other product that you need to think about is yourself. You're selling yourself in the beginning. I don't have, a ton of, I can't offer money. I can't offer influence or prestige. Like, what I can offer is a mission and a vision and the opportunity to be a part of that. And I can offer my story. And so I didn't realize how much of it would be about being able to build a relationship through, myself with potential customers, with employees, with potential investors. And that's been a really good insight and something that's been fun to learn.
Yeah. And I think it's so interesting. I think probably that's way more valuable at these early stages when, no one knows about your product necessarily. And you're like, okay, look, I'm building this. I'm passionate about this. There's an unmet need. And then, once it kind of years down the road, whatever it may be, then people are, they know it and whatnot. But I think it's a very interesting aspect where, it's not, you don't really think about that as a part of the process. So I love that. Okay, Christina, we are going to end off with 2 fun questions, which, by the way, I've loved this conversation so much. So really thank you for coming on to my show. So, okay, Christina, one is, what's a passion you have outside of, student athletes, mental health, all of this sports tech? What's another passion of yours?
Well, my hobbies still tend to be related to sports, so I hope that's okay. One thing that my husband got me into is road cycling. So we love to go take our bikes out, go for a ride. And, what I like about it is I'm not trying to compete in any race. I'm not trying to hit any goal. I'm just out there having a good time, for general, health and fun. So it's been a great outlet, a great way to explore new places as well. Get on your bike and go for a ride. So that's something that we love to do together. And hopefully also, unlike soccer, where it's hard to play as you get older, I hope it can be a sport that I do for life. Yeah,
I love that. That's awesome. And then my final question is, what is a weird, fun, hidden talent that not many people know about? So I'm going to go first. And what I do is I throw blueberries into my mouth. So I'm going to do that for you right now. All right. Let's see how this goes. All right, here we go. There we go.
Okay. That's a good talent, for sure.
Thank you. Very valuable.
I don't know if I have anything as fun as that. I think that one thing I'm not too bad at planning a good party, actually.
Ooh, very cool.
I think that I acquired these skills after planning my own wedding. And, you spend a year planning that and you're like, wait, what do I do with these skills? So now I apply that to our own parties that we like to host, pre-COVID. Yeah. Actually, this year would have been our 4th annual ugly sweater holiday party. No. So obviously put that on hold. But I like getting creative with that. We have arts and crafts stations. We have our make your own photo booth. And
wow, you go all out. I love it. That sounds great.
Well, we're a competitive couple, and so each year the ante, raises, and at some point we're like, we're definitely going to get a DJ.
Oh my goodness, I love it. That's great. So thank you so much again. And all the student athletes listening to this, Please check out MyHuddle. I can't, promote it even more. I love the mission. I love the idea. And I think one of the coolest aspects about it, like you mentioned, is it's, right on your phone. It's so accessible. You don't have to go through your school. You don't have that stigma, and it's just having that ability to just go and seek help. So I really love it, and I'm so happy I could talk to you and share your story. So thank you.
Thank you so much.